All right, how's it going? I hope you're doing well today, and I want to welcome you back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 77, and we're going to cover pages 88 and 89 in our book today. The primary chords in D minor and the song Raisins and Almonds. All right, so welcome back, and I hope you are doing well today. And before we get started, I just want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all the latest uploads. I'm going to keep working my way through level 1, and I'm getting more and more excited to jump into level 2 once we get to that point. All right, so here we are on page 88 and 89. We got a lot to cover today. So the primary chords in D minor, we're going to have a little bit of a review here at the top of page 88 and get into a little bit of theory. So as a review, the D minor scale is basically all the notes from D, I'll just use one hand here, from D to D. The key signature does have one flat, and that is a B flat right there. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use my left hand because I just realized we're working with bass clef here on 88. So here's your D minor scale. All the notes are D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. So that is the D natural minor scale, just so we don't have any confusion, because there are actually 3 forms of minor scales. But natural minor means you're playing nothing more than what's in the key signature. So again, that's D, E, F, G, A, B flat, because that's our one flat, C, and D. Now, if you look at the very top line, it says reviewing the D harmonic minor scale. So harmonic minor is actually more common, and we're going to be using a lot of that in our song today. Now, what does harmonic minor mean? So as a review, that means you're going to raise the 7th note in that scale. Now, this isn't reflected in the key signature. You're still going to have that one flat, that B flat. But it means the 7th note of the scale is raised a half step. Now, the 7th note in the D minor scale, you start on D, which is number 1. That counts as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the 7th note is C, and if we raise that a half step, that becomes C sharp. So if you look at that top line, look at the bottom notes. So they have a few chords written in on the 1, 4, and 5, 7. But if you look at the bottom notes, that is a D with a number 1 under it, indicating that's the first note of the scale. E is 2, F is 3, G is 4, A is 5. 6 is our B, but it's going to be B flat. And then 7 is our raised 7th, which becomes C sharp. Now the C sharp has to be written in. Again, that's not going to be reflected in your key signature. So all C's, if they want them to be sharped, the accidental has to be written in the piece of music. And then finally D. So we're going to review the primary chords. So as a review, primary chords in major or minor is 1, 4, and 5. This series, this book, the Alfred book, has been using 5, 7. So I'll review that in just a second, what makes a 5, 7 chord a 5, 7. So we're going to go to our first chord, and that is built off of the first note of the scale, D minor. Now, as a review, to build a chord, and this is just a 3-note triad, you build it in thirds. So starting on D, come up 3 notes from D, that's F, and another 3 notes, that's A. So there's our D minor chord, D, F, and A, which is also called our 1 chord, indicated there by the Roman numeral. And notice it's a lowercase Roman numeral. That's because it's a minor chord. If it was major, it'd be a capital Roman numeral, but it's lowercase. So the 1 chord is D minor, and that is in root position because the D, the name of the chord, is at the bottom of the chord. So D, F, A, D minor, root position. Now we're going to go to our 4 chord. So that is 4 notes up on the scale. So again, D is 1, E is 2, F is 3, and G is 4. So now we're going to build our chord in root position. This is G minor. But before we do that, let's just build our chord composed of thirds. So a third up from G is B. Now a third up from B is D. Now it's supposed to be G minor, but if you look, that's actually G major. So what we have to do is look at our key signature. All B's are flat, so we need to flat that B. Now we have G minor. So the 4 chord in the key of D minor is G minor, and this is also in root position because the G is at the bottom. Now our last chord is a little tricky, A7. Now we've dealt with 7th chords plenty in the past, and I may or may not have explained what makes an A7, or in this case a 5/7. In this case it's an A7, a 7th chord. So first off, let's just build our 5 chord. So you're going to go up 5 notes, D, E, F, G, A. Again, we're going to do the thirds, A. But in this case, the C, which we talked about is often raised, is in fact a C sharp. So let's go ahead and sharp it, and then an E. So that is an A major chord. That is a 5 chord, and notice it's a capital V for major. But it's a 7th chord. Notice there are 4 notes. So a 7th is 7 notes up from the bottom note, from A. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be G. And there's our 5/7 chord, which is A7. A, C sharp, E, and finally G. And if you're looking for the fingering, my rule is if it's a 4-note chord, almost always you're not going to use the 4th finger. So 5, 3, 2, and 1 is a pretty comfortable fingering. Now this is also in root position because the A is at the bottom. So now we're going to do some reworking of these chords, because as you know by now, we don't play these chords all in root position. We do things called inversions for smooth progression. So if you look below what we just looked at on page 88, in the middle left, it says the following positions are often used for smooth progression. So we're going to start with the D minor chord, our 1 chord, and that is going to be in root position, and that's going to stay there. But we don't want to jump up to G minor. We want to rework D minor so that we don't have to move far. So G minor is G, B flat, and D. Well, the D is already being played right there. So if you look at the G minor chord, the 5th finger stays on that D. The 2nd finger goes to G right here, and the thumb goes to B flat here. So this is the position, this inversion that you're going to be using in Raisins and Almonds. So get used to going from D minor in root position to G minor. This is actually called second inversion. I won't get into the details today why, but just in case you were wondering. So the thing that you really want to focus on isn't so much the names of root position and second inversion, but just focus on what's moving on the piano. So from D minor, all you got to do is your 2nd finger should be on G and your thumb comes up to B flat. The higher up you play D minor, the smoother and closer you are to that B flat. If you're down here, so your thumb has to go all the way up, so that takes a little bit more time and work. So work on getting your fingers in the keys. We've talked a lot about this in the past. And then our last chord is the one that's really confusing. It's A7. It's probably easier to just memorize this than to go through all the theory of why this. But here it is in root position, right? 4 notes. You notice this is just 3 notes. Well, there's a rule that for a 7th chord, you can leave out the 5th. Now the 5th is, in this case, the E, 5 notes up from A. The 5th really doesn't play an important part in the sound. The 3rd and the 7th do, and of course the root. So A, C sharp, and G are the only notes you need. But A, C sharp, and G can be found down in here. So here's the nearest A. We're already on the G, and the pinky finger can just go to C sharp. So again, it's finding a inversion to really allow for the least amount of movement possible, just to keep a smoother sound. So you're left with this progression: D minor root position, G minor second inversion, and this A7 is in first inversion. And then we're back to D minor. So that sounds a lot better and is really a lot easier to play than that. So that's why we're doing that. We've been doing that really since lesson 1 practically in this book. I just thought it'd be nice time to really go through a review of why we're doing that in case you were wondering, and in case I hadn't really explained that in the past. Now, if we look to the right, it says play several times, saying the chord names and numerals aloud. So this is something you really want to do before playing Raisins and Almonds. If you look at Raisins and Almonds, you're actually playing broken chords, which we're going to do an exercise with that in just a moment as well. But remember that when you do a broken chord, this is still what you're playing. This is the outline. So if you really focus on your block chords, you already have your fingers in position for the broken chords. So you really want to go through this a lot. Get these chords under your fingers and say the names of the chords when you're playing them too. That really helps. So D minor, G minor, and the A7. And that little exercise actually goes D minor, G minor, and back to D minor, and then finally the A7. So yeah, you really want to memorize that. You could also memorize, 1, 4, 1, 5, 7. That's another way of looking at it. But the one thing I'm going to stress that's the most important, that no matter how you learn this, what's most important is what's happening down on the keys. So again, that goes back to where you're playing. If you're playing higher up in the D minor, you're going to find it easier to get to the G minor. And you want to study the fingering of moving from one chord to the other. So ultimately, that's what's going to help you learning this by feel down there. So maybe not so much by looking at it, because you're going to be looking at the music, but really working on how this feels. So for instance, when I'm doing D minor, it's flat. They're all white keys. It has a very flat feel. When I go to G minor, my thumb is raised. I'm coming up on a black key, the B flat. When I'm going to D minor, I'm returning to that flat position. And then when I go to my A7, now my pinky's raised. So things like that, I think, really go a long way to memorizing by feel. Now we have a D minor progression with the broken chords. So it's the same thing, but just broken. So that D minor that we just outlined, if you look at the first measure, you're just playing D, F, and A as quarter notes. The next measure, the G minor, G, D, and B flat, and then back to D minor. And then that last measure is A7. So it's the same thing you just played, but broken. So when you think about your outline, if your fingers are already there like you're playing block chords, you should have no problem with this. So when I go to G minor, I don't keep my thumb there necessarily on the A. I could, but if I think about moving ahead of time after the D minor, then I'm already there just in case. So there's no, last minute jolt. And sometimes when you do a last minute move, you don't have the control anymore musically. So you might play the note too loud. You might slip off the key, things like that. So you want to always try to work ahead. So see how my thumb went to that B flat. Now I have more control. When I go to D minor, my thumb's already down on A. And, I might even start moving that pinky to the C sharp before I finish my D minor chord, just to be there ahead of time for the A7. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to always be right there. But it's just something to really consider, and I strongly believe it does help. A big part of piano is looking ahead, working ahead. And that's part of the practice. That's why we practice so much, because we're working on playing in the moment and thinking and looking and working and even listening ahead. So it's pretty amazing when you start to combine. Basically, you're combining the present, being in the moment, and the future, what's to come. So it's pretty wild when you think about it. All right, so like I said, you want to really get those under your fingers, those chords, because that is Raisins and Almonds. The left hand is entirely broken chords, these 3 chords. Let's go through it now. So the very first measure of Raisins and Almonds is a pickup measure, and it's only the right hand. You'll notice there's 3 beats per measure, and you've only got 2 quarter notes, so that is beats 2 and 3. The left hand's resting, but go ahead and have your left hand ready to go. When we get to pedal in a little bit, you're going to have your foot ready to go on the pedal, but you won't be able to hold the pedal down because the pedal doesn't come in until the left hand comes in. But we'll get to pedal a little bit later. If you study, and there's a couple ways to look at this, if you study the left hand here, so the first full measure is the second measure, it's the same D minor chord for 1, 2, 3, 4 measures on the first page, and it continues through the top line of page 89. So what I like to do is commit to memory that for the first 8 full measures, I'm just sitting on this D minor chord. That's my hand position. When you put the hands together later, you might even consider playing the right hand while your left hand just sits in that position, because that is the outline. The other way to look at it is this book often uses chord symbols. So if you look above the treble clef, back at page 88, on the first full measure, your right hand in the treble clef's playing, 3 A's, but above that you have a D and a small M. That's D minor. And that continues all the way through page 89 until you get to the second line. That first measure, it changes to an A7. So that's also letting you know that you're on the D minor chord all the way until you see A7. So if you've got D minor memorized down here with your fingers, you could forego reading the bass clef and just read the chords. And again, it's just the same broken pattern over and over and over again. So again, that's all it is for the first 8 measures. It's just D, F, and A on every single measure. Just nice steady quarter notes. So that means our left hand in this piece is sort of acting like a metronome. You've got a note plate on every single beat. So on page 89, when we get to the second line first measure, that's when we're on our A7. So you should be thinking about that pinky coming right to that C sharp. Your other 2 fingers, 2 and 1, should already be on G and A. So that's the big move. And that's just for 2 measures. Because on the third measure on the second line, you're back to D minor for 2 measures. And then we have G minor, so be thinking about that thumb coming up to B flat. Down on the third line, you're still there. In the second measure, you're back to D minor for 2 measures. And then A7, going down to the fourth line, D minor. Third measure, A7. Last measure, D minor. So we're getting in a pattern here of every 2 measures the chord changes. Bottom line, second measure, A7. Third measure, A7. And then we're going to end the piece on D minor, but this is a little different. This is the extended position. So you got 5 on D. You're going to move your 4th finger to F. That's the important one. 4 to F. You've been doing 3 on F. And that's so you can get 2 to A. So eventually, you can get your thumb up to that D. So that's what you're doing right there in the last 2 measures. But up to that point, it's all the same. It's very repetitive. So that's the easy part. Now the right hand's a little more complicated. It's got some mixed notes and rhythms. The right hand is our melody. So you're going to start with your thumb on D. And initially you're actually outlining a D minor chord. And if I look ahead, your right hand is going to stay in this D position. Maybe I'll highlight all 5 notes. It's actually going to stay here until you get to the last measure of the second line on page 89. So you see on page 89, second line, last measure, you have a 3 on B. And keep in mind that's B flat because all B's are flat. We're in D minor. But until then, your hand is not going to move. So if you look at both hands together, both hands are outlining D minor for the first 2 lines of this song. because when you get to the beginning of the second line on page 89, your left hand shifts to A7, but your right hand's still going to stay there. So going back to the beginning, the right hand, you got your thumb on D, and we got 3 on F, and then our first full measure, we got 3 A's. So those notes are essentially D minor, D, F, and A. So you're literally playing a broken D minor chord in a manner of speaking. So the first full measure, you've got 3 A's. The next measure, you have another A. Now look at your rhythm. This is a dotted quarter note. So that's 1 and 2. The G is an eighth note. That's the and then 2 more eighth notes, 3 and. So that's an A, and then a G, F, G, and actually the next measure, you're going back to A. So the rhythm right there is 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. Now at that point, third measure, this A is tied into the fourth measure. It's a dotted half note and a quarter note, so that's 4 beats. And the way you would count that is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. When we get to beat 2, you're actually repeating everything you just played. Beat 2 is like beat 2 of the very beginning of the song. You got your thumb on D, 3 on F, and at the top of 89, you got 3 A's, followed by an A dotted quarter note, and the same rhythm and same notes. Now this A is tied for 5 beats, dotted half note to another half note. At the very end of page 89, the top line, you have another A on beat 3, and then it's going down to E, but you don't move your hand, you're still in the same position. Second finger's on E on the second line, and then you go to F, and the second measure, it's just G, F, E, back to F, and then your thumb will get this D on beats 2, 3, and it's tied for another 3 beats. Now you've got the big jump. You're going to bring that third finger over to B flat. Now when you do that, you're sort of in a G minor position. And I'm going to go ahead and say G minor, G harmonic minor, because the C is going to be sharped. You're going to have a C sharp coming up. So the last measure on the second line, you've got 3 on the B flat. It's a half note, 2 counts, 1 more B flat quarter note. Go down to the third line, we have B flat yet again. And then our C sharp, that's our raised 7th, borrowing that from the harmonic minor scale. 5 on D. And then your second finger should be on or around A for measures 2 and 3. Now that's tied. That's 6 counts. A dotted half note and another dotted half note is 6 counts. When you get to the fourth measure, that second finger that's on the A, bring it over. You're going to go right back to that D minor position. You're going to play 2 on the E, just like you did at the beginning of the second line. So third line, fourth measure, we got 2 on E, followed by F, and then the last measure is G, F, E. Down on the fourth line, come back to the F, and that thumb goes down on D for a total of 5 counts. 2 counts plus 3 counts timed together. Now your second finger is going to come up to A. You're essentially coming back to the position you just jumped up to earlier, that G minor position. So if you outline it here, you're actually in good shape. But A is your note with the second finger for 2 counts. Beat 3, you play another A. And then this is a little tricky. We have a G and a C sharp played together on beat 1, followed by the 3 is going to get the B flat. Make sure it's not 2, you'll run out of fingers. 3 on the B flat, and then 2 on the A, and then that leaves 1 and 5 on the last measure for F and D. That's tied into the bottom line for a total of 6 counts. Dotted half note plus another dotted half note. Now we have the biggest jump of the piece. We're going to take our second finger and come up to a high A. you're actually playing the exact same thing you just played all the way to the end of the piece. So if you look at the fourth line again, third measure, you played 2 on A, another A, G and C sharp, B flat, A, and then F and D. So when you come up here, it's the same thing. A, followed by A, G and C sharp, B flat, A, and then F and D. So that makes it a little easier because higher notes, harder to read. It's good to know the notes, of course. You want to be able to read those, but it'll make it a little bit easier to play once you realize that this is the same thing up here. So it's sort of an echo of sorts. All right, that covers the right hand. So it's repetitive in places, so that's nice because it looks like a long piece, but it's actually a little bit less to learn when it's so repetitive. I'm not really going to go through the rhythm as much as I used to. I mean, we're getting close to the end of the book, so at this point, you should have a pretty good understanding of how rhythm works. This piece has eighth notes. Not many. There's only 2 spots, actually, where I see them in the right hand. So if you want to be exact, count 1 and 2 and 3 and. But if you are good enough just counting 1, 2, 3 and then sneaking in those eighth notes where they come in, have at it. I'm going to actually go hands together now, and that's where I'm going to focus on some of these rhythms, because I think hands separately, like a lot of pieces at this point, are much easier. The left hand on this piece is ridiculously easy once you've learned your chords, but like most pieces, when we tie it together, it feels like a whole new ball game. So like I said at the very beginning, you're going to have both hands in the D minor position. So the right hand starts us off, and I'm not really going to get into the steady rhythm just yet. I'm going to work on putting notes together. So this first full measure is already tricky because you got different notes in your left hand, but you got the same note in the right hand. So you got D and A, F and A, and then A and A. The next measure, you're still on A, you're down to D. Here's our first bit of tricky rhythm. So first off, you want to line up everything. The D in the left hand, the A in the right hand are together on beat 1. The F in the left hand comes in on beat 2. And then the right hand comes in with the G on the and of 2. And then you want to make sure the A in the left hand and the F in the right hand are together on beat 3. Followed by the G on the and of 3. And then lastly, you want to go into the next measure. You want to make sure that comes together. So when you're working on just this second full measure, go all the way into beat 1 of your next measure to ensure smoothness and you've got the right rhythm at the end of that measure. Now with the counting, I'm going to start on that second full measure again. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. And then I'm just going to stop there on 1. So once again, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. Now you can think about like aerobics, piano aerobics I call it. So you can have both hands, left, right, both, both. So that might be a mouthful, but that's another way to look at it, because you're thinking about 3 things. When you put hands together, it's either both hands play together at the same time, the left hand plays, or the right hand plays. That's it. It's one of those 3 things, or nothing plays, but that won't be the case in this piece. You don't have a rest in both hands. So it's both hands, left, right, both, right, and then both. So that could help with the learning process as well. Now remember I said you could also choose to not do the ands in the whole piece. If you took the ands away from this measure, it would be 1, 2, 3, 1. Or you could just say the ands when they're played. 1, 2, and 3, and 1. What you want to avoid, though, you have to be super careful about. And if this happens, then you'll need to go through the whole piece counting ands. You don't want this to happen. 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2, 3. See what I did on the next measure? Very easy to just breeze right through that, but it's 1, and 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, and 3, and... That's the common mistake that people make. They get the right rhythm, and they play the eighth notes fast enough, but then when they go to the next measure where it's all quarter notes, they speed it up. And part of that is it's just really easy to play. And so when something's easy to play, you might not even realize you're speeding it up. How do you realize it? Count it out. So when in doubt, go to the ands. 1, and 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, and 3. And the other thing is, people might say, that's so slow. Well, that's true. It probably is slow. But then the eighth notes, you weren't ready to play them up to speed yet. So obviously the goal is to get everything together at a slow speed and then work your way up. So eventually you'd be 1, and 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, and 3, and even that's a little on the slow side. But the other thing about this piece is if you practice both hands together, sometimes go through it and listen to your left hand. Now, I wouldn't do this when you're first putting it together, but if you listen to your left hand, remember what we said earlier? Your left hand is the same thing. It's the metronome. So if you find your left hand going in one measure and the next measure, if your left hand changes pace, then obviously you're speeding up in places. So that's another way you could check yourself. So we said the top of page 89 repeats. It all repeats what you just played. When you get to the last two measures of 89, you are here. So this is different in the last measure. On beat 3, you have the A in the right hand, and you have an A in the left hand. When we go to the next line, this sneaks up on us. We got the 2 on the E, but then we got that 5 on C sharp, so be ready for that. It's a half note, so you have a C sharp and then the G on beat 2 in the left hand, and then A and F. Now this next measure is kind of tricky. C sharp and G, G and F, and you're probably thinking that doesn't sound right. Well, you're right. In the moment, when you pause, it doesn't sound right. When things are moving, it sounds better. So the second measure, it's just an awkward combination of notes. C sharp and G, G and F, A and E, and then we're sort of back to everything being D minor. D in the left hand, F in the right hand, and then F and then D. And you're just going to keep holding that D for one more measure. Now here we have a big change. We're going to stay on the D in the left hand, but you're going to jump to 3 on B flat. And your left hand, though, starts changing to that G minor chord. 2 on G. And on beat 3, you got B flats in both hands. Now, the third line, here's an awkward measure. Back down to D in the left hand, B flat again in the right hand. Then you have G and C sharp. And again, doesn't sound good, but it's correct. B flat in the left hand, D in the right hand on beat 3. So that's another awkward combination of notes. And then you're back to D in the left hand and A in the right hand for 6 counts. You're going to go to C sharp now on the fourth measure. Bring that second finger down to E. G on beat 2, and then A and F. And then here we have another combination. Oh, we had this on the second line. The C sharp and G, the G and F, the A and the E, and then the fourth line we're back to D in the left hand, F in the right hand, and then F and D. Keep that D down for another measure. Third measure, we're changing to the A7 chord. 2 comes to A in the right hand. So you got C sharp and A, G in the left hand on beat 2. We have A's in both hands on beat 3. Now this kind of helps a little bit. This is still hard in the next measure, but you got C sharp in both hands. C sharp in the left hand and C sharp in the right hand, plus that G in the right hand. Now don't forget on beat 2, you got the B flat in the right hand, G in the left hand, B flat in the right hand, and then A's in both hands, and then you're going to end up on D's in both hands, but thumb on the F also. Hold that for 6 counts. Stay on D minor to the bottom line. And remember, your left hand and the right hand are repeating, but your right hand just does it up an octave. So you're still in the A7 chord, but all this is the same that you just played. Now when you get here, the left hand has to do the stretched fingering here, the expanded position. So change 4 to F, 2 to A, and then thumb to D. All right, so let's look at pedaling next. Let's go ahead and activate our pedal camera. All right, so we got our pedal camera on, and like a lot of our pieces that we've been working through in this book, the pedal and the left hand really are working together. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. So when your left hand chord changes, you change the pedal. And, you know, the left hand chords are clearly marked and very easy in this piece. But when your right hand starts to play maybe faster notes, faster rhythms, and the notes are kind of close to each other, you might have to have some extra pedaling. A good example of this would be at the very beginning of the piece, at the bottom of page 88. So you're on the D minor chord, so you should essentially just be able to hold the pedal down and just keep playing it. And that would be fine. But when you had the right hand right here, you hear it start to get a little muddy. And they actually had us even pedal before then too. I'm not sure why. But sometimes if you pedal more often, it does kind of keep the volume softer, because when you hold the pedal down, your left hand is just building up volume, because the pedal keeps holding and you're applying more and more and more notes. And even when they're soft, it can be a little loud. Now that's only the second measure, full measure in, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with that. But we'll go ahead and honor the pedal marking. So let's look at it first, just the left hand with the pedaling. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have your foot resting on the pedal, but you won't be able to have it down because the right hand plays some notes before that. So have it resting, and as soon as the left hand goes down on the first full measure, your pedal comes down too. Now you're going to pedal on the second measure. Now remember, when you go down on the note, your foot comes up at the same time and then right back down. So it's going to be a quick up-down motion. Now we're going to pedal again at the top of 89. So it's really a repeat of what you just did on the previous page, the same exact pedaling. So we're pedaling almost every measure. So obviously the A7 chord, you're going to pedal, and they have us pedaling again. So yeah, you're essentially almost pedaling every measure. If you look at the right hand, it kind of makes sense now. The places like here on the middle of the third line, you're not pedaling because the right hand is tied, so that kind of makes sense. But you can go ahead and almost plan on every measure. And I won't even go through the rest of it because it really is pretty basic. But yeah, make that mental note, or you can even make a note on your music, that wherever the right hand is tied, that's where you're going to hold the pedal. Everywhere else, you are going to pedal. So let's look at it working the hands together. So you're going to start with your right hand and then both hands together. And then pedal. So like I said, make sure your foot's back down on the pedal before beat 2. Otherwise you'll lose the note in beat 1. to the second line on page 89. And these are really important places to pedal right in here, because we talked earlier about the sounds that are a little harsh. Like going into the third line right here. So here's an important pedal. On the third measure of the fourth line. Going into the last line. Now there they did pedal. I have no idea why. And the last two measures, you're just going to hold down the pedal. Yeah, if you look on page 89, last measure, fourth line, first measure, fifth line, they did break the pedal there. Go figure. Was that on purpose? Was that a mistake? The world may never know. But if you do pedal there, not a problem. If anything, probably just make it sound even better, because it's just not getting too heavy. But I'll leave that up to you. Now the last thing to cover before I play it for you up to tempo, dynamics. So your melody is always going to be louder, regardless of what the music says. Always bring out your melody. They actually put that in this piece, that the melody, your right hand, when you start, is mezzo forte. That's going to be a nice solid volume throughout. You probably don't want to get up into the forte range. That gets a little too loud. Your left hand, mezzo piano. If you want to do piano, even better. Keep it nice and light. It really is just supposed to be in the background. So this is the contrast you'd like to have between both hands at the beginning. Obviously, that's one of the hardest things to do, and one of the last things you want to do. You already want to have your pedal really comfortable at this point. So now we're on the last measure of the second line on page 89. So this is where you jump up. And notice there's a crescendo here. So it's interesting how they wrote this. They have a crescendo in the last measure of the second line, and then another crescendo on the third measure. So why not just write one continuous crescendo? My thought is, one, they didn't think to do that because it's on separate lines, that you could just write C-R-E-S-C for crescendo and just keep it going. Or they intended for it to build and then back off, which is actually kind of interesting. I'm actually going to do it that way. I kind of like that. So starting on the last measure of the second line, we're building our crescendo, getting louder, and then backing off on the third line and getting louder again. So that's kind of nice to get louder, back off, and then louder again. And then we're going to start coming back down, and your left hand's going to take care of that. Now we're pretty soft at the end of the third line. Stay soft here in the fourth line. Now the third measure, we have another crescendo. And then the fourth line, last line, we get softer, and here's our little echo. So really soft here. And then we fade away. And then you just barely want to tap that last D, marked pianissimo. If you want to do a retard there at the end, you could. That would feel fine, I think. They didn't mark it, but I think that works well. All right, I think that covers our basis. So I'm going to play the piece for you up to tempo. I'll give you a little count off. I'll give you a full measure and then beat 1, and we'll come in on beat 2. So we got 1, 2, 3, 1. Let me try that again. It didn't sound. So 1, 2, 3, 1. Yeah, so I like it with a little retard there at the very end. All right, so it's a nice, pretty piece. Written in D minor, but sometimes minor keys actually are quite nice. So as a review, remember, learn page 88, the primary chords first. Get those down, memorize them by feel. Just get the block chords down, memorize them by name, so that this is D minor, G minor, and A7. And then, of course, work on getting the broken chords. Do the same thing, memorizing them. Then you've essentially learned the left hand to the whole song. You could even go ahead and put the pedal with the left hand while you're working at it, instead of waiting until the very end. Work the right hand separate, get that melody down, get your rhythms down. These dotted quarter note followed by eighth notes. You really want to bring that out. It only happens twice, so bring that out. If we get lazy and hit quarter notes, it's just not going to be as interesting. Plus, it'll probably throw you off beat-wise. The other thing, of course, is the dynamics. The dynamics that we went through at the end really make the piece sound very lovely. And if you can, get that right hand much louder. Heavier playing in the right hand, lighter playing. If you have to practice without pedal, just banging this out and just being very soft here, maybe staccato. You just want to work on heaviness here, light here. The book never talks about this. It just says do it. So they don't really give you a chance to practice. So I want to make sure you do have that chance, because that's a huge part of music, bringing out your melody. And that means playing that hand, whichever hand that is, usually the right hand, louder. All right, so I hope you enjoy this piece. I wish you all the best. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the section below. I love answering them. Good luck on this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.